I sat there, staring at her, the woman I had called my wife for 5 years, the woman I had built a life with, the woman I thought I knew. But now, as she stood across from me with her arms folded and her gaze fixed on the floor, she wasn't my wife, not anymore. She was a stranger. Wearing her face, a stranger who had just torn my world apart with a single sentence. I cheated because I needed a real man. For a moment, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Nothing about this was funny, but because of the sheer absurdity of it. Stronger. What the hell did that even mean? Physically, emotionally, financially, in what way had I failed to meet some arbitrary definition of strength? And why did she say it like that? So, matter-of-factly, like it was, some inevitable truth I should have accepted long ago. The words hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. I waited for her to take it back, to show even a flicker of regret. A single tear, a slight tremor in her voice. Something, anything, to tell me this wasn't easy for her. That this betrayal, this destruction of our marriage had CA her something too. But she just stood there, silent, impassive, waiting for me to break. Maybe waiting for me to scream, to beg, to collapse in a heap of pain so she could feel justified in what she had done, like my suffering would somehow validate her actions, like my reaction would prove her right. And then a voice cut through the silence. Well, can you blame her? I turned my head slowly, my mind struggling to process what I had just heard. Had I misheard? Surely I had misheard, but no. Her mother sat there, arms folded, the same cold indifference in her eyes that I had seen in her daughters, like they had practiced this moment rehearsed. If for weeks you've always been passive, her father added, shaking his head, she needed more from you. A real man would have seen the signs. My chest tightened. My hands curled into fists. But I didn't speak, I couldn't. It was like my brain was short, circuiting, trying and failing to comprehend what was happening. Her sister, lounging on the couch, just shrugged. Honestly, we all saw it coming, and that was when I felt it. Not heartbreak, not grief. Clarity, a sharp, undeniable realization that cut through everything else. They weren't defending her. They were blaming me. I glanced back at my wife. No, not my wife. The woman I had wasted years of my life on. She still hadn't said a word, letting them speak for her like they always did. It was almost laughable. How predictable this was. I had spent years with her, given her everything. I had worked tirelessly, sometimes, late into the night, to provide for us, to build a life where she wouldn't have to worry about anything. And this was the thanks I got. Not just betrayal, not just deception, but complete and utter disrespect, as if I had done this to myself, as if I had driven her to another man, like my failure had made her choices inevitable. I exhaled slowly, pushing away the last remnants of disbelief. There was no point in arguing. I could see that. Now they had already made up their minds about me. Maybe they had never seen me as part of the family to begin with. The truth hit me like a cold slap in the face. It had never really been my marriage. It had always been theirs. A family affair where I was just the extra piece, the provider. The outsider they tolerated until I wasn't useful anymore. I looked at her one last time, searching for something, anything that would make me feel like I was losing something important, a flicker of remorse, a trace of the woman I once loved. But I felt nothing, not even anger anymore, just clarity. And that's when I smiled. That's when I laughed. The sound left my lips before I even thought about it. It wasn't forced. It wasn't planned. It just came out, pure, raw amusement at the insanity of it all. And that's when the room exploded. Are you seriously laughing right now? Her sister snapped, sitting up straighter, her voice dripping with disbelief. Her mother leaned forward, her expression twisting into something close to disgust. This is exactly what we're talking about. You don't take things seriously. No wonder she needed someone else. I shook my head, letting the laughter fade into a slow, knowing smurf. Then I looked at them all, one by one, letting my eyes settle on each of their faces. They weren't just against me. They were convinced I was the villain in all of this. "You're pathetic," her father muttered, shaking his head like he was ashamed of me. Like I was some kind of disappointment. "Your wife is telling you she had to go elsewhere for what she needed, and this is how you react." Her sister scoffed. Arms folded, her lips curled in something between amusement and disgust. "Honestly, just leave." Already, she added, waving a dismissive hand. "You clearly don't deserve her. I almost wanted to ask what exactly had I done to deserve this? To deserve a wife who betrayed me? To deserve in-laws who were so comfortable spitting on my dignity, while I stood there still processing the wreckage? But I didn't ask. There was no point in their eyes. I'd already lost, and they weren't going to let me forget it. And my wife, she was still silent. Still standing. Their arms crossed, biting her lip, watching them fight her battle for her like she always did. It was almost funny how predictable it was. Sighed, rubbing my temple, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle deep in my bones. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice highly calm. "She cheats on me, lies to me, betrays everything we built, and I'm the problem." Her mother's eyes narrowed, her expression hardening. "You pushed her to this." Her father nodded in agreement, his face twisted in disappointment. "A man who lets his wife feel neglected is no man at all neglected." That word almost made me laugh again. I had worked late nights, sacrificed sleep, and everything I had into making sure we had a comfortable life. I had been there for her when she cried over petty fights with her sister, when she stressed about things that didn't even matter, when she doubted herself and needed reassurance. I had held her, supported her, been loyal, present, and somehow none of that counted. I glanced at her, waiting, just waiting to see if she would at least step in, say something, take even a shred of responsibility. But she just stood there, her lip caught between her teeth, arms still folded. Nothing. That was the final confirmation I needed. I had spent so much time trying to be the man she needed, but she had never actually wanted me, not really. I had been convenient, and now I was disposable. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my keys, and twirled them between my fingers. Their voices grew louder, overlapping each of them, trying to get the last word in, trying to make sure I walked out of there believing I was the failure. But I wasn't listening anymore. I had already made my decision. I twirled my keys in my fingers, letting the metal clink together, a small sound in the middle of all their noise. They were still talking, still arguing, still trying to drill into my head that I was the reason for all of this. I had stopped listening. I took one last look at my wife. She had barely moved. Still standing, their arms crossed, face blank. She was waiting for something, for me to explode, for me to beg, for me to ask why. But I wasn't going to give her that. She didn't deserve it. I smirked, shaking my head. "You know what? I'm done." The words hit the room like a bomb. Silence for the first time since this disaster of a conversation started. No one spoke. They just stared at me, processing what I had just said. Then her mother scoffed. "Oh, please, you're just being dramatic." I raised an eyebrow, slipping my keys into my palm. Her father let out a sharp breath through his nose, shaking his head. Her sister rolled her eyes. My wife, she barely moved, just stood there waiting. I exhaled and turned toward the door. "You all wanted me to take responsibility. Fine, I'll take responsibility for the one thing that actually matters." I reached for the door handle. "Leave it." It was the first thing my wife had said all night. That wasn't a deflection, wasn't an excuse. It wasn't even a demand. It was something else. Panic. I turned my head slightly, but I didn't stop. "Are you seriously walking out right now?" her father snapped. "That's the kind of man you are running away." I let out a short breath of laughter. "You've been telling me all night that I'm not a man, right? So why would you care what?" "I do." Now I pulled the door open. That's when the real panic started. "Wait." Her voice was sharper now, desperate almost. "You're just going to leave, just like that." I glanced over my shoulder. "Yeah, just like that." Her sister scoffed, crossing her arms. "You can't be serious." She almost laughed like she thought this was some kind of bluff. "You're seriously going to leave everything over one mistake?" I raised an eyebrow. "One mistake?" My wife's jaw tightened. "I told you why it happened." I nodded. Slowly. "Yeah, you needed a real man. I heard you the first time I gave her a long, hard look. Let him handle it." Then her eyes widened slightly, and for the first time I saw it. Fear. I didn't wait for another word. I stepped through the doorway out into the night and slammed the door shut behind me. And just like that, I was free. Or so I thought. My phone started vibrating before I even made it to my car. The first call, then another and another. By the time I slid into the driver's seat, my screen was lighting up like a damn Christmas tree. 50 mesquite calls. I stared at the screen, watching the numbers climb, then chuckled to myself. Now they cared. I pressed the ignition button, and the car rumbled to life. My phone still face up on the passenger seat wouldn't stop vibrating call after call. Her name, her mother's name, her sister, even her father. They were all taking turns, like I was some call center and they were customers demanding service. I didn't answer. I didn't even hesitate. Pulling out of the driveway, I rolled down, the window slightly letting the cool night air rush in, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace, the kind of peace that comes when you finally realized you don't owe anyone a damn thing. But they weren't ready to accept that. As I turned onto the main road, the text started. Her. Are you seriously ignoring me? You can't just leave like that? Her mother. You need to come back and talk like an adult. Her father. Coward. Her sister. Wow, real mature, running away like a little boy. I smirked. They really thought they had that kind of power over me, that their words still carried weight. Then another message came in. Her. I'm sorry, okay? Just answer me. Oh. And there it was, the shift from anger to guilt, tripping from insults to apologies. It was a game one they had played before, one she had mastered over the years. Push and pull. Break me down, then lure me back in. But I wasn't playing anymore. The phone kept lighting up, vibrating so hard against the seat that it nearly slid onto the floor. Her name again, and this time a message. Her. Please just talk to me. Her. I don't want to lose you like this. We can fix this. Fix. What exactly? The fact that she had thrown away years of trust for some guy she thought was a real man. The fact that she had watched arms crossed as her family took turns cutting me down, chipping away at whatever dignity I had left. She hadn't cared about fixing a damn thing when she made that choice. I glanced at the screen again, hesitating. Not because I wanted to reply, no, that part of me had died the moment I turned the handle and stepped into the night. But I was curious to see how far she would take this. What excuse would she pull out next? What justification had she come up with for throwing away everything we had? The light flickered green and I pressed down on the gas, letting the road stretch out ahead of me. Another vibration. Her. You can't just leave me like this. I need you. Oh, and there it was, not when she was making her decision, not when she stood in that room silent, letting her family gut me with their words, not when she watched me walk out the door making no move to stop me. No. She needed me now that the silence had settled in, now that the weight of what she had done was pressing it on her, now that she was staring at her phone, realizing I wasn't groveling, wasn't fighting, wasn't begging to be enough. I let out a slow breath, gripping the steering wheel. Something inside me hardened. Something permanent. I reached for my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen for a second. Then without a second thought, I tapped exactly where I needed to block them. I tossed the phone into the glove compartment, shut it, and drove forward, without looking back, blocking. Her number should have been the end of it, but people like her, they don't just let go. They don't just accept consequences for the first few days. The silence was deafening. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was almost peaceful. I knew better than to believe it would last. And I was right. It started with mutual friends, people I hadn't heard from in months, suddenly checking in like we were old buddies. The messages were always the same. Hey man, I heard about what happened. You should really talk to her. She's going through a lot right now, maybe just hear her out, you know? I ignored them at first, didn't engage, didn't respond, but then the call started first. It was Kevin, a guy I'd known since college. We were never close, just part of the same social circle. I answered mostly out of morbid curiosity. Harold, man, how you holding up? I leaned back against the couch, rubbing my forehead. Why do you care? Kevin sighed like he had the moral high ground. Come on, dude. It's not like that. I just think maybe you should talk to her. Sheck a mess right now, I scoffed. She wasn't a mess when she spread her legs for another guy. Jesus? Harold. He let out an awkward chuckle look. I get it. You're pissed. But you got to understand, people make mistakes, relationships, go through things like this. I laughed a real bitter laugh. Mistakes, Kevin. She made a choice that spat in the face of everything. I gave her a choice. She stood by right up until she realized her real man wasn't so real after all. Silence. I could almost hear him struggling to find the right words, to find a way to spin this into something I should just get over. Finally, he cleared his throat. I mean, I don't know, man. I just think maybe you should consider forgiving her. Yeah, I asked. Tell me something. Kev, if your girlfriend cheated on you, let her whole family rip you apart, then stood there like you didn't matter, would you be so quick to forgive? That's not the point. Harold, no, Kevin. That's exactly the point. I ended the call, but it didn't stop the next day. Jake called. Same angle, different voice. Hey man, you know, relationships. Nope, I hung up before he could finish. Then it was Mason, one of her friends, pretending to be neutral. Dude, you got to understand, I hung up? And so it went one after the other. Like they were taking shifts because that's what was really happening. She thought she could trade up. Thought she could swap me out for someone more exciting, more dominant. Whatever the hell she convinced herself she needed. But the reality, the guy she cheated with wasn't interested in playing the role I had. He wasn't going to pay her bills. He wasn't going to handle responsibilities. He wasn't going to take care of her problems. She wasn't a wife to him. She was entertainment, a fun little escape from whatever life he actually lived. And now that I was gone, now that she wasn't cushioned by the security I had provided now, she understood what she had really done. I got confirmation of it when I ran into an old co-worker of hers at a coffee shop, a guy I barely knew, but who apparently knew all about my situation. Dude, he said, lowering his voice like he was letting me in on a secret. She's been a wreck. I raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of my coffee. That's so he nodded, glancing around like we were being watched, complaining about money, saying she doesn't know how she's going to keep up with everything. Now that you're gone, I smirked, shaking my head. Sounds like a personal problem, he chuckled. Yeah. Well, she was talking about how she thought he'd step up. You know, the other guy. I didn't even have to ask who he meant. I just leaned back in my chair and let out a short laugh. But I guess that didn't happen. He added, Of course it didn't. I took another sip, savoring the irony. What did she expect, that some guy willing to screw another man's wife was suddenly going to play husband? The coworker shrugged. I mean, yeah, it kinda seems that way. I shook my head, almost feeling bad for how predictable it all was. Let me guess, he's ghosting her now. Not completely, he admitted. But yeah, she said he's been distant, avoiding her calls, making excuses. You know how it goes. Oh, I knew how it went. The same guy who had entertained her. Complaints about me, wasn't so thrilled when those complaints became his burden. She gambled, she lost, and now reality was setting in. Her family wasn't going to support her. They weren't going to pay for the life she had grown used to, and her so-called real man. He got what he wanted and moved on. And me, I was nowhere to be found. Sometimes disappearing leaves a louder echo than any frantic call or desperate play. At first there were scattered accusations, anger, and demands, but after those early days of silence, after I refused to engage, something shifted. News of my absence began to spread, and the repercussions came swiftly. I watched from afar as my former life unraveled, each thread of the relationship coming undone as she was forced to face the reality of her choices. I heard she was struggling, forced to confront the practical consequences of a decision that in hindsight was as reckless as it was thoughtless. The other man, the one she had once believed to be my replacement, proved to be nothing more than a passing interest, someone who had never intended to shoulder the responsibilities of a real partnership. And in his absence she found no comfort, no assurance that life would continue as it once had. Her family, the same people who had lined up to condemn me, who had rallied around her when it suited their narrative, slowly withdrew their empathy as the true cost of her actions became apparent. Without the structure I had once provided, the bills began piling up. Daily life became burdensome. The security she had taken for granted was gone, and reality was hitting her in ways she never anticipated. I knew all of this, not because I cared not, because I was checking in, but because people told me. Old friends, acquaintances, some reached out with concern, some with curiosity, and others with poorly concealed satisfaction at watching her downfall. One of them, Mike, an old college buddy who had always seen through her, called me one evening. "Man, you are never going to believe this," he said, half laughing. "Guess who showed up at Jen's party last night?" I already knew the answer. Drunk, crying, I asked, not even looking up from my drink. Mike exhaled, both she cornered. Lauren. Lauren, dude, and started rambling about how she made a mistake, how she didn't realize what she had until it was gone. I swear it was like watching some shitty rom-com in real time, and the other guy I asked more out of amusement than actual interest. Mike chuckled. "Oh, he was nowhere to be found. Didn't even last a month after you walked out." Shocker, huh? Not at all. I took a sip of my drink. Sounds exhausting. "Oh, it was," he said. She kept saying, "You wouldn't even talk to her, that you just disappeared like she never mattered." Well, I said she wanted a real man to handle things. Right, sounds like she got exactly what she asked for. Mike let out a low whistle. Cold man. But I get it. You're not going back, are you? I exhaled, leaning back. Not even if hell froze over, and I meant it. There was no point in trying to mend something irreversibly broken. I had chosen my path, a path where I reclaimed control over my life, a path where I refused to be entangled in the consequences of a betrayal that was never mine to bear. With every update, every message from people who couldn't resist filling me and my resolve deepened. I had let go for a reason, and while others might have wished for some dramatic confrontation, some explosive reckoning, or even a teary reconciliation, I was determined to leave no space for further drama. My former life with her had been a series of compromises and silent sacrifices. I had given more than I ever received. I had shouldered responsibilities without complaint, endured the small daily dismissals, and ignored the creeping realization that I was being taken for granted now as she struggled to manage her own affairs. It was clear this wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about revenge. It was simply the natural consequence of her choices. A relationship is built on mutual contributions, on respect, on trust, and when one partner decides to undermine that balance, the foundation crumbles. She had made that choice, and I had stepped away before the collapse became my burden. I ran into an old friend at the gym one morning, a guy named Alex, someone who had known us both but had never taken sides. "Man, I got to ask," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead as we leaned against the treadmills. "Do you ever regret it?" I took a sip of my water. Regret what? Leaving, cutting her off? Just walking away. I exhaled slowly, considering the question. But the answer was already settled, deep in my bones. No, I said simply. Alex studied me for a second, as if waiting for some hesitation, some sign that maybe, Just maybe there was a part of me that still looked back. There wasn't. Damn, he muttered, shaking his head. Not even a little. Sometimes I admitted I regret that I didn't leave sooner. That shut him up for a moment. So, no chance you ever go back. I chuckled, under my breath. Alex, let me put it this way. Sometimes the best way to heal is to close the door permanently. Not to leave it open just in case, not to keep it cracked, hoping for reconciliation that never really exists. He let out a low whistle. That's cold, man. No, I corrected, that's survival. There was no dramatic comeback, no desperate midnight phone call where she finally realized what she had lost. No teary confession that made me reconsider everything. Nothing. Time passed, and while I built something new, something stable and unburdened by misplaced expectations, she remained tangled in the wreckage of her own making. The absence of my presence, of my steady hand, served as a harsh reminder of the structure she had taken for granted. And while she attempted to rebuild, the experience left scars, some visible, some not. There was no poetic redemption in her struggle. No profound lesson wrapped up in neat little words. It was simple cause and effect. She had made a choice that led her here and now. She had to live with it in the end. My departure wasn't a defeat. It wasn't a surrender. It was a final statement. I had walked away from something toxic, something unsustainable, and I had never looked back, because the man who never returned, he wasn't running away. He was moving forward, and as I continued on my own path, leaving behind the echoes of a past I no longer claimed, the message remained clear. When you lose sight of what truly matters, the cost is inevitable, and no amount of pleas or false promises can reverse that truth. Filing for divorce was easier than I expected. It was clinical cold, just another legal process that stripped away the illusions of what once was. We hadn't been married long enough for her to bleed me dry. No marital property meant no settlement. Our 401k accounts were still small, and the portion I had to split with her didn't bother me. Money could be rebuilt. I wasn't about to fight for scraps. When what I really needed was freedom, I signed the papers without hesitation. She hesitated, not because she wanted to fix things, not because she regretted what she had done, but because she was finally realizing she had overplayed her hand. I wasn't some desperate fool who would cling to the wreckage. I was done, and she hated that. The day of the final hearing, I walked into the courthouse with my head high and my mind clear. She was already there, sitting with her parents. Her mother looked exhausted, like the past few months had aged her. Her father, though he looked angry, good. The clerk called our case, and we stepped forward. The judge barely looked up as she skimmed through the paperwork. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, addressing me, "you agree to the terms as written?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And Mrs. Reynolds, do you also agree?" She hesitated, just for a second, before nodding. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge stamped the documents then. "As of today, your marriage is legally dissolved. Alimony will be paid for 1 year. As agreed, that concludes this case," and just like that it was over, or so I thought. As soon as we stepped into the hallway, her father stormed toward me, his face twisted in rage. "You think you can just walk away?" he growled. I barely glanced at him. Already. "Did you ruin her life?" He spat his voice. "Rising, you abandoned your wife." I cut him off. She stopped being my wife. The second she spread her legs for someone else, his fist came fast, wild, sloppy, fueled by emotion rather than skill. I saw it coming before he even fully committed. I stepped aside, letting his swing cut through. Empty air. The momentum threw him off balance, and before he could recover, I countered my fist, connected with his jaw. A single clean shot. He crumpled out cold. The hallway went dead silent. I rolled my shoulders, adjusting my suit. Then turned. To my ex-wife, she stood frozen wide-eyed. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. I met her gaze, calm and steady. Then, with the same quiet finality as signing those papers, I said, "That is how a real man does." Business, dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.